Today we launch a new series on the legacy of female leadership in Africa.
The truth about Africa from Africans.
As you follow along, you will find that Africa has had a long history of diversity and inclusion before diversity and inclusion became a huge global topic. For decades, the achievements of leaders in European nations have been touted, analyzed, and reanalyzed, often overshadowing the remarkable history of female leadership in Africa. The truth is, long before women's rights, diversity, and inclusion became focal points of global discourse, African societies had already embraced the leadership of women in governance, military strategy, and diplomacy. The African continent has produced powerful female leaders and warriors for centuries, championing women's rights in ways that were unheard of in many other parts of the world. To put this fact in sharp contrast, a look at ancient European history reveals notable female leaders such as Joan of Arc, who reigned from 1412 to 1431, and Queen Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, to Catherine the Great, 1729 to 1796, and Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901. While these figures left indelible marks on European history, Africa, during the same period and even further into the past, had an even richer tradition of female rule and leadership. Starting with ancient and pre-colonial Africa, in the parts that are currently known as Egypt, we had Queen Amanirenas of the 14th BC. She was a warrior queen who led Kushite resistance against Roman rule. And we had Queen Tawaseret, who reigned from 1191 to 1189 BCE as the Pharaoh of Egypt, the last ruler of the 19th dynasty. And we have Queen Nefertiti in the 14th century, who co-ruled Egypt alongside Akhenaten. And of course, Hatshepsut, who is well known and one of the most successful pharaohs who conducted extensive building projects in Egypt, and she reigned from 1479 to 1458. And lastly, the Pharaoh Queen, Subekneferu, who reigned from 1806 to 1802 BCE in Egypt. And then we move on to West Africa, where we had queens like Kahina in the 17th century, a Berber warrior queen who led the Berber resistance against Arab expansion in North Africa. And we have Queen Yenenga in the 12th century in what's currently Burkina Faso and Ghana area. She was a warrior princess considered the mother of the Mossi people. And of course, there is Amina of Zazzau, or Zaria, who reigned in the 16th century in parts of modern-day Nigeria, and she was a warrior queen who expanded the Hausa state of Zazzau. And we moved to Central and Southern Africa, where we had Queen Nzinga Mbande, the queen of the Ndongo and Matamba people who fought against Portuguese colonization. She reigned from 1583 to 1663 in what is modern-day Angola area. And then we have Queen Ranavalona I of Madagascar. She resisted European colonization, and she reigned from 1778 to 1861 in modern-day Madagascar. And of course, Queen Ranavalona III, also of Madagascar. She was the last ruling queen before Madagascar was annexed by France. She reigned from 1861 to 1917. Despite the deep-rooted tradition of female leadership, the colonial period saw a stark shift. Male-dominated European rule disrupted the power structures that had allowed African women to ascend to leadership roles. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw the erosion of female-led governance, as colonial administrators often imposed patriarchal European systems that marginalized African women from leadership and political influence. However, this did not mean the end of powerful African women in leadership. Instead, they adapted to new forms of resistance, activism, and governance, such as Nehande Nyakasikana. From 1863 to 1898, she was from Zimbabwe and led a resistance movement against British rule. And Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, 1900 to 1978, who in Nigeria played a critical role in advocating for women's rights and political inclusion. Additionally, is the well-known Aba Women's Riot of 1929 in Nigeria, which saw thousands of Igbo women rise against colonial rule. Women such as Ikonia, Nwanadia, and Nwongo led these protests, challenging unfair taxation and colonial oppression. Post-colonial Africa has seen the rise of modern female leaders. As African nations gained independence in the mid to late 20th century, women once again began to reclaim their place in leadership. Many African nations saw their first female heads of state and government in the post-colonial era. Among the first to break the glass ceiling was Elizabeth Domitian, who became the first woman ever to lead an African nation as Prime Minister of the Central African Republic from 1975 to 1976. She was followed by leaders like Agathe Uwilingiyimana, who served as Rwanda's Prime Minister from July 1993 until her unfortunate tragic assassination in 1994 during the Rwandan genocide. Other notable female leaders include Aminata Touré, who held office as Prime Minister of Senegal from September 2013 to July 2014. One of the most celebrated modern African leaders is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who made history as the first elected female president in Africa, serving Liberia from 2006 to 2018. Her tenure not only marked a significant shift in African politics, but also served as an inspiration for women worldwide. Other modern female African leaders include Joyce Banda of Malawi, who was president from 2012 to 2014, Amina Gorib Fakim of Mauritius, who was president from 2015 to 2018, Sel Work Zwedi, who is currently the Ethiopian president, starting her tenure in 2018, and Samia Suluhu Hassan, currently the Tanzanian president, who started her leadership in 2021. The legacy of female leadership in Africa is vast and undeniable. Long before gender equality became a global discussion, African societies had already demonstrated their acceptance of female rulers, warriors, and strategists. The colonial era may have disrupted this tradition, but post-colonial African nations have steadily been reclaiming their history of strong female governance. Today, as the world pushes for greater gender inclusion in leadership, Africa stands as a testament to the fact that women have always had a seat at the table and often the throne. Join us as we continue to explore this rich history of female leadership in the African continent. Like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for our in-depth series on the forgotten queens and warriors of Africa, as well as the modern women breaking barriers in leadership today.